One of my priest friends was telling me about a homily he had shared with his parishioners some time back. At the end of Mass, as people were leaving, many gave him some praise and some positive feedback about what he had said. He remembers that one woman said to him, "This was one of your best, Father. It was excellent. Everything you said, every example you gave, applies to someone I know." It's easy to listen to what we think other people need to hear, isn't it? And this is the weekend, of course, in the gospel that we're talking about. We're talking about a gospel where the image is, let's say, it's the person complaining about a speck in someone's eye when they ignore the beam in their own eye. You know, sometimes I see this kind of thing happening at Mass too. Sometimes I'll notice someone is nudging or poking someone as something is being said. You know, it's one of those, hey, you ought to listen to what Father is saying right now because it applies to you. It's one of those kind of moments, isn't it? Yeah, sure. That's good. That's good news first thing in the morning, isn't it? Jesus challenges us to look at our own lives first before criticizing others. Maybe we would be much better off looking at our own lives instead of criticizing others because, well, I think experience has taught us that criticizing others never seems to end very well. One of the central images in our gospel today is the story about the blind guides. Let's talk about that a little bit. Jesus came into this world to tell us about God and God's ways, because basically what the people had been thinking about God up to that point really was kind of wrong. The sense people had about God, the God of the Hebrew Scriptures, the God of the Old Testament, was a God of punishment and retribution. Jesus came, he sought to change that. They wanted people to come to acknowledge God's love and mercy and compassion being alive in their lives. Jesus came to open the people's minds about who God was. The same holds true about how people saw God and what they thought about what God's kingdom meant. So, with that as a background, let's keep in mind that when we criticize other people, what we are basically saying is that we think they're not following what we consider God's ways to be. The beam in our own eyes are our own, say, limited notions or false notions about who God is and what God's about. Throughout his ministry among us, Jesus told us that God's ways are about mercy and compassion. And you know, sometimes we struggle with that. We might prefer God to be on our side and not necessarily standing with other people, as if God could be subject to our lobbying God, our possessing God, like we're holding God in a little box to be brought out and used when we need God in a particular situation. Maybe even going so far as to say that God would help our side and actively work against others, because we want God to be merciful to us. Well, if God is trying to be merciful to others, well, I guess that's okay, as long as God is being merciful to me and to mine. The beam in our eyes is that we look at God through the eyes of this world. We think that God follows our rules or our conceptions of what's right. An all-powerful God confined to our rules and our way of the world? Really? I mean, how do we break this mold and be freed from this? I mean, we are the ones who follow God. It's not that God follows us. The antidote to all this is for us to be people of mercy and compassion. To live mercifully and act with compassion might be the most faithful thing we can say and do to show our faithfulness to God and to imitate God's ways. Jesus said that we will be known by our fruit, by our actions. Acting with mercy and living with compassion shows that we are acting with God. Acting with mercy and living with compassion shows that we can share our faith with others. Show them the face of the living God, the God who is with them in good times and in bad and everything in between. Acting with mercy and living with compassion shows the world that God is living and alive in our midst, even in the midst of all the inhumanity and the chaos that we create for ourselves and for one another. And all we need to do is just pick up the paper and read about what's going on in Europe right now. Living with mercy, acting with compassion, shows us we can be agents of God's mercy and less agents of correction in the world. Thinking about it a bit, the blind guides actually are not a bad idea if they are safe guides who are honest about their limitations. At least those who know their vision is limited may temper their guidance with humility and not hubris. They would call us to rely on others. Those who think they can see clearly, most clearly, perhaps they're the ones who are most dangerous, even in unintended ways, because they are very likely wrong. We need to be able to make room for God in our lives to guide us. Wisdom is a gospel virtue. Wisdom realizes that we enjoy a very limited vision. Let us place our trust and our reliance in God. We surrender to God. We remember that Jesus, his Son, calls us to act with mercy and live with compassion. And the mercy and compassion God shows to us when God acts with us is a good way, a good example that we might show the world, that we might show our families and our neighbors. Removing the beam from our own eyes so that we can see how to live in the ways of God's mercy says something about our closeness to God. It's our being merciful and our being compassionate that makes us most like God each day.